What's up, Overlanders and Overglampers? Today we are here to review the Starlink. This is something I have been looking forward to because it is a key part of my ability to overland as much as possible while still maintaining some work balance. So in order to get to places, during the week, maybe a day early or stay a day later, the ability to work remotely and join video calls where there's no cell reception is something that's very, very important to me and probably to other people that still have their day jobs and want to do as much overlanding and camping in general, doesn't have to be overlanding, as possible. So I ordered the Starlink a few weeks ago. I have recorded probably no less than 5 or 6 videos, and you're gonna hear why today. And I have not posted them. It arrived in about 2 days, came from Hawthorne, California, it looked like. I think that was the city. I'm on the West Coast, so it only took a couple days to arrive, and it was in a very simple box that had the satellite dish, a 50-foot cable. I did measure it. You can order these in up to, I think, 150 feet online. And the router. The router you just plug in the dish to. It's got like a micro USB, mini USB, micro, I think, type thing. It looks a little bit wider, so I'm not 100% sure. Plug that into the router. Router throws off Wi-Fi, and away you go, which we'll talk about. Only other connection on here is power. If you wanted to use your own wireless or hook it into Ethernet, like for home internet purposes or, supporting, perhaps a business, there is a cable you put in line with this cable and the router, and it throws off an Ethernet connection. You disable the Wi-Fi functionality off this router when you do that. You still need this router to control the dish. But then you get Wi-Fi and Ethernet off something else. So that is possible, doesn't come with it, but you can order it. This is obviously the Roam unit, not the residential unit or the commercial unit. Roam comes in 2 options, this portable little thing that is $700, and the in-motion unit, which goes on top of RVs and, I guess it could go on top of a bigger car. I think it's $2,500. So got the unit, very simple instructions. Don't try to bend the dish because it has a motor in it that moves around. Connect the dish to the router, plug in the router to power, and then fire up your Wi-Fi and go to the Starlink access point, which is where the problem started. So first, I went a little bit old school. I brought my laptop because I was like, I'm gonna have to plug into something to configure it, or I'm gonna need a browser to configure it. Connected with the laptop, went to the same Wi-Fi access point. No, it does have a phone picture, so I kind of ignored that. And it asked me to name what I want my access point to be named, or SSID, and a password. Did not have any other options, just those 2. No security options like web, WPA, WPA2, for those that know wireless security, which I guess really doesn't matter. You're usually going to use one of these units out in the middle of nowhere with nobody else around, so you have some sort of physical security. And, if you really wanted true security, you wouldn't be using their router. At that point, I set it up, reconnected it, nothing happened. And I'm like, okay. This is interesting, and there's no other documentation that comes. So, Starlink, where's the documentation? Like, it just says connect to the wireless. It doesn't even say go to the internet. It just happened my PC opened up a browser, and I named the Wi-Fi, but it says do nothing else. It says support.starlink.com, but it doesn't say go to that. But that's what I did. I said, okay, what else do I need to do here? I found out on their site that there is a Starlink app for your phone. So clearly they want you to do everything from the phone. Would have been nice to say, install the Starlink app on these instructions. So instructions, while they seem simple, 1 out of 5, you could have just said, when you're done, install the Starlink app. So after browsing the support site, getting the instructions, I installed the app, which is an amazing app. It's really awesome. Gives you a bunch of telemetry on the dish, bunch of telemetry on the router, or information, I shouldn't say telemetry. So the dish will tell you signal strength and obstructions and all that. The second I fired up the app on my phone, the dish started to move. I don't know if it was the app triggering it, or if it just was a matter of time, but it started to move. It moved, Jerry. Seinfeld quote. It was back here, and I got a connection. As you can see, there's some trees behind me. And it was like 100 megs a second, 15 up, and 100 megs down. And it was working, and then it just would drop. It would work, and it'd drop, work, and drop. It had several firmware updates in this process, but it kept working, dropping, trying to update firmware, doing all these various things. I'm like, okay, clearly it doesn't like these trees. And I get the satellite needs line of sight, but I don't know. I was expecting it to be able to get through trees a little bit. I don't know how low Earth orbit satellite works. So I moved to the front yard. Less trees, more of an opening, or more of a way to get over the trees because they're further out. Left it out there for a long time. Same kind of result. And it kept getting in this firmware update loop for the dish. It would try to update to firmware 8CD, boot 3 or 4 times, and then fall back to the old version. It would do it again and again and again. I left the thing for out there for like an hour because everywhere in the instructions it says, hey, it may need to sit 30 minutes or 15 minutes or, it has all these times in different articles, but just like let it sit. So that's my first thing. I'm like, let it sit. So you want this portable unit that's supposed to sit and like do things. Like I just want to plug it in and need a connection. And while I'm not expecting it to be instantaneous, like you want me just to leave it there 30 minutes before I can do anything. Some of those articles said like for the initial setup, and some of them, just said like generally it needs to sit. So go through this whole thing, recording now my 3rd video, and it's not working. So pack the thing up and say, okay, I'll go to the park. The next day, I'm like, I'm done with this. I've spent 2 or 3 hours futzing with this thing now. So I go to the park the next day or a few days later, can't remember. It's a wide open park. There's trees, but they're all on the outside, like hundreds and hundreds of yards away from the center where I park. Put the dish in the back of my truck because it has power. Another frustration I'll get to. And it does things quicker. I'll say like acquiring the signal, and the signal seems to be more stable, but still not perfect. And it's still stuck in this firmware update loop. And come to find out on the Toyota Tundra, sorry, they're just playing overhead, hopefully you can't hear it. The bed power, even in the hybrid model, turns off after 20 minutes. I get that on the regular model, but there's a big old hybrid battery pack in the back that has a lot of watt hours on it. You'd think that they'd be like, hey, if somebody turns on the bed power of the hybrid model without the truck running, that we can leave this running for a while. No, turns off after 20 minutes. So I'm now frustrated at this, as well as the Starlink that I've now messed with for maybe 4 hours in total time. Back it up, go home, put it back in the front yard again, and leave it there. Same kind of thing, doing this whole firmware update, won't go to ACD, disconnecting, coming up, disconnecting, coming up. It gets a little bit more stable, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna leave this here. And where it is in the front yard, it was clearly pointed towards pretty much the best opening it could have been pointed at. you know, there were trees, but like, I don't know how wide the beam is on this thing, but if it was hitting the trees, it was like just the top of them. So it gets more stable. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go play soccer with my kid. So we're playing in the front yard and it moves, and then it moves again, and then it moves again. And it's been probably sitting out for like an hour at this point. And I go back to it, and finally, it had the current firmware that it kept trying to update. But it still was having reliability issues with the connection. I tried FaceTiming a few people. One worked. One, you know, kind of dropped in the middle. There's on the dish, you'll see in the app, it collects data about obstructions in the area, but it takes, once again, 6 hours to do that. You can scan with your phone. So I don't know if the purpose of collecting that obstruction data is to point at a better set of dishes. My expectation was, you know, there's this string of 1,000 satellites in the sky, or thousands, I don't know how many there are. And it would kind of be able to point to the best set with the least obstructions, maybe within some reason. I get they're not going to all be overhead at any one point in time, but I figured there would be a few points it could point to, so like maybe straight up's better. I don't know if that's what it does after 6 hours, is figures that obstruction data out and, you know, repoints it. So that's where I'm at with this thing. First impressions, I'm like, how is this going to work at any campsite with trees? There's people that sell poles specific to Starlink, because it's got the motor, so you don't want the pole to flex around, you know, a ton and, you know, be waving in the wind. It'll burn out the motor apparently. So I'm like, I could put a, you know, pole up on the back of the truck and mount it when, you know, I get there. Most of them are collapsible, or they're like 2 or 3 sections, it looked like, to get the thing more elevated and get a better connection. Or I'm gonna have to really research like campsites that are open and figure out how the satellites move during the day, you know, versus where this campsite is and how this is gonna point. You know, obviously not all overlanding sites are, you know, closed off. There's plenty. You drive out in the middle of nowhere and there's, you know, no trees around at all. Or maybe order the longer cable. I mean, 50 feet is pretty long. Going up to 150, you know, maybe get it in a better area. I don't know. But like I said, this was a big part of me and the family doing this. You know, to try to get as much time possible around work. I'm very dedicated to my job and love it. You know, so I don't want to make a sacrifice there either. So I got to figure this out. If you have one of these units and have experiences like I have, you know, if the trees, it's just always going to be finicky. If there's any sort of tree in sight, that'd be good to know. You know, if the in-motion unit maybe is better because I think it's a bigger panel, that'd be good to know. If I think I may have a bad dish, you know, I saw lots of people with a similar experience when I was looking on Reddit that they opened a support request and, you know, Starlink deemed their dish bad. I did open a support request, which there's no number to call and you have to send all these pictures. That was kind of weird. I'm like, it's an ISP. You'd think there'd be a number to call. So I don't know, 3 out of 5 on that. I'd like to call a number. But I didn't want to like get a dish until I was sure the thing was bad. That's why I went to the park. So I'm gonna go out to the park again with a EcoFlow or something like that to get it up and stable more often. But I'd like to hear from others, see what their experience is, if they're kind of having the same sensitivity to obstructions that I am. When it gets connected, man, and really gets connected, like, because sometimes it was 20 or 30 megs a second, you know, it was screaming fast with no latency, like 20 milliseconds. So what I'm struggling with is, why is it so well connected 1 second, and then all of a sudden it just drops. I know it only connects to one satellite at a time, and then it micro switches between as needed, but like if the connection's that fast with that low latency and then it drops, part of me feels like maybe there's a problem. So I'll figure it out with the trees. First impressions, like I said, better instructions, tell me to install the app. It'd be nice if it came with the Ethernet split off, because for me, I'm like, there should be an Ethernet port here. That's kind of weird. Support, okay, but we'll see what this really means for our overlanding journey. And if we have to work around the problem another way or be a little bit more creative, I don't know what that would be. Amazon's coming out with a solution next year or a year after, I believe. Hopefully that'll bring down the price of this, but also maybe offer different coverage, more coverage. You know, competition's always a good thing, especially in a new field and new service. You know, there's nothing really you can get besides Starlink that's low latency. Everything else is high Earth orbit and, you know, has a ton of latency attached. So you're not going to do those voice and video calls and things like that. So let me know what you think in the comment section. Hopefully this is helpful for those looking at Starlink. Follow me and see what we end up with here. Thanks, everybody.